Good evening, everyone. I'm assuming I don't think I have to say good afternoon or good morning, but just in case we have friends from Europe and the US or North America, good morning, good afternoon. So on today's topic, we are going to be talking about how to draw better boundaries at work. It's a very interesting topic that I personally have never spoken about before in my past talks in Calm Collective, which for those who know has generally been around men's mental health with the I Feel You Bro series. So it's really welcoming and exciting for me to be joined by two female panelists this time. And to be able to hear from them their personal and professional experiences around setting boundaries at work. So a little bit more context as well. The era of remote work and the constant interconnectivity has allowed us to lead 24/7 work lives when the pandemic happened. So when the pandemic happened, we've been very pressured as individuals to always say yes to everyone and be on at all times because we're worried about certain things like uh coming across like we're lazy, for example, a very, very common feeling that we have, especially during the pandemic. And now as we're shifting into what people are calling it a hybrid way of working, or that people are actually going back into the office already, how do we start drawing those boundaries? So in this talk, we are joined by two panelists, two beautiful ladies, as you can see on screen, and they will join me in discussing the importance of setting and asserting these healthy boundaries to work smarter, build better relationships, and manage our well-being and our mental health at work. So please give a round of applause, a virtual round of applause. You can type clap in chat if you want, for Dari and Emmy. Emmy, do you want to go first?
Sure, just trying to find the mute button, the unmute button. Yeah, so my name is Emmy Lou, and I have a bit of an interesting background. So I work in a consulting firm, so a Big Four, and I work in a space which is around, so I work in consulting, which is a difficult area when we talk about boundaries and work and those sorts of things. But prior to my career in consulting, I actually had another career, and that was in mental health nursing. So I was a mental health clinician, and I was the person that you would see if you were in Brisbane in Australia. If you were on a bridge and you were about to jump and somebody had intervened, if you were somebody who came into the emergency department, or you were someone who police needed to go and see, I was the person that you would speak to at 10 o'clock at night, 3 o'clock in the morning, 5 a.m., whatever. And I had to basically counsel you out of whatever situation you were in, and give you the tools and the skills, or help you to get the professional help that you need. So that was my career before consulting. And then it's actually crazy how much I use these same skills in consulting. So a lot of the work I do is with management of big companies, so CEOs, CFOs, CIOs, all overseas. And my mental health skills come in too often. So yeah, so that's a little bit of a teaser about who I am and my kind of reason for being on this panel.
Thanks, Emmy. How about share one fun fact about yourself that all of us should know? For you as well, Dari, later on. Yeah.
One fun fact. I don't know if there's anything fun.
Is that what consultancy is?
Yeah. Do we have fun? Are we allowed to have fun? I guess so. I'm a pretty interesting person. I get told this all the time. Right? I'm an interesting person. I was born in South Africa. I grew up in the outback of Western Australia, so in the red dirt Aboriginal communities, and then I moved to larger cities in Australia, and I'm actually based in Singapore. So I guess in terms of where I've lived in the world, I don't think I'm unique, but that's something fun about me.
All right, thank you, Emmy, so much for that. Dari, over to you.
Okay, hi, I'm Dari. I have been a social media lead with Rise Media for about 2 years. So just to give you guys some background, Rise Media is a digital media publication. We are also considered an alternative media where we kind of touch on a lot of topics, subcultures, things that are mainly, kind of brushed under the carpet in the Asian conservative society. So that's one of the main reasons why I joined Rise in the first place. Yeah, and I've almost always been in the media industry. So I've always wanted to be a journalist. This kind of a pivot for me being in social media, but I think I've really found my true calling. Call it a balance, if you will, between copywriting and being able to kind of create content on the go, right? That sparks conversations or change in a social media space, which is constantly changing, evolving, and a means for which we can reach so many people across the world, right? Yeah, and I think that's helped me broaden my horizons and my perspectives as well. Yeah, and in terms of a fun fact,
Yeah.
yeah. I gave it a thought. I don't know if this is fun as well, but I tend to enjoy rewatching like two particular like sitcoms. So Brooklyn Nine-Nine is one, the other is New Girl.
Oh,
Think of
great
it what you
choices.
will. But
Great
yeah, I
choices.
love those two shows.
Yeah.
Thank you for validating my taste in
We are just
television.
odd like that. No,
Yeah,
I absolutely concur with that one. Thank you so much for sharing, Dari. We have a
of
lot more to
course.
talk about after this talk. Just a food for thought for everyone in the audience as well. You know what Dari said about her always wanting to be a journalist, and Emmy also giving a little bit of background, her professional background too. I'm curious to what the crowd thinks about which industry or company, not the names, just industry, I guess would be better, you think has the hardest time in setting boundaries. You know, when Dari, what you were speaking earlier about being a journalist as well, I'm a communicator by trade too, in sustainability, and but as a communicator, a lot of people say communications don't sleep,
Yeah.
right? And when the crisis happens at night, you have to look into it, even though we all know that the crisis can wait till the next day sometimes. So, you know, that's my own personal note. So for everyone else in chat as well, while we go into the first question, just let us know which industries do you think actually have huge difficulties and huge obstacles in trying to set better boundaries at work. All right, so the first question for the panelists would be simply, what are boundaries at work and why do you think they are important? Emmy, can I throw this one to you? I see you unmuting yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So what are boundaries at work? Is that the
Yeah,
question?
can you give us your definition of boundaries at work and why you
Yeah.
think they are important?
Look, I think that my boundaries at work are what I will do for the company that I work in that are aligned to the values and the purpose that I'm trying to create. So, every organization, I believe, should have a purpose that's aligned to their strategy and all the rest of it. But they should also have a set of values that drive the behaviors that occur within the organization. And as long as I feel like I'm in line with those and that the company is in line with those for me, I feel like that's where the boundaries are.
Thanks for that, Dari.
I think for me, I guess my answer would differ from Emmy's. I personally feel that boundaries are something that help, an individual kind of safeguard themselves from, anything that's detrimental to their mental and physical well-being. So while I agree with what Emmy said, right, where it's also related to the purpose that, the company or the brand that you're kind of working for serves, I think it's also something that you have to do for yourself. So drawing boundaries around yourself to kind of protect yourself, right? You don't want to overwork and burn out. Yeah, I kind of think of myself as a candle, and I'm like, I gotta be really careful. I don't want to kind of burn the midnight oil too fast. Yeah.
Right, but then what do you do in the case where someone who doesn't or tries to draw these boundaries are perceived as weak or lazy, right? These are some very common misconceptions of that as well. So can we talk a little bit about that? Because I mean, you did mention also about how the culture of the company is quite important in delivering some of these better boundaries outcomes, if you will, for lack of a better term. Like, so what can we do to address that? Because it happens sometimes just purely because like Singapore's culture is just like that.
Yeah, so I think it also comes back to the metrics. So how is the company recognizing and rewarding certain behaviors? And I think that, my shift from Australia to Singapore was quite a shock to the system, but also not, right? So I would say that in Australia, a lot of the work that I did it was long hours, right? But it wasn't expected. It was long hours because I really wanted to give. And for me, it was like, I'm going to work on my Saturday because I know that the impact that I'm making and the trust that I'm building in society is more important than something else that I might have on a Saturday morning, right? So that didn't happen all the time, but if I had to sacrifice that, I was like, I'm happy to do this because this aligns to my values and also the purpose of what I'm doing. I think the shift or the difference that I've seen in particularly in Singapore, and I'm just going to be really candid about this, is it's almost sometimes like an expectation. And it's like, you're not working hard enough unless you are doing the hours, right? So it's like, if you leave earlier, it's even if you weren't actually working, even if you're on social media, if you leave earlier or you leave later, you're perceived as doing harder work. But if you leave earlier, you're perceived as being lazy. And I tend to challenge that because I go, if I'm delivering value as opposed to hours, then isn't that what you're asking me to do?
I mean, that should be the KPI. No one says that in my yearly plans, I am going to clock in 160 hours in the company. And you're right about that. So it's a very mismatched in terms of expectations. And I guess it really does boil down to that individual manager at the end of the day. But I also think it's worth noticing or at least acknowledging that the higher up you are in any corporate ladder or any work pyramid, it gets easier to actually set boundaries. So we do need to respect that a lot of our friends who are like technicians, for example, like you can see some of the examples as well in healthcare, in the agency world, in auditing as well. Like these are colleagues and friends who really just have such a difficult time. So Dari, before I throw it over to you, I'll give this one to Emmy and then you can give us our thoughts, because I'm wondering from her consultancy work, how do we trickle that down to those who actually really need it?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so firstly, I'm just going to say that I started my career in nursing, right? And nursing is the kind of job where, like, you work crappy hours. That's just a given. You give up all your weekends. You work. You're in a ladder system where you've got to work your way up. Not dissimilar to the corporate world. And you sacrifice a lot of your personal time to do what means something to other people, right? And you do it because you care, not because of the money, not because it's not that great, but because you genuinely want to make a difference for people. So that's one thing. I think going back to your question, and can you repeat the question for a second?
So just how do you trickle that culture downwards to ensure that it's effectively carried out?
So I think my role, I think, and I'm a manager, senior manager level, right? So for me, I look at the people below me, and if I think about it in a purely hierarchical sense, right? I don't look at the world like that. I think it's quite flat. But if I think about it like a hierarchy, I want to make sure that those people are protected, right? And so they do the work, but at the end of the day, they're not burnt out. Because if we burn that layer, the work doesn't get done, really. And, I think about in the type of organization that I work in, and also in healthcare, there are certain people who have to do a specific task, but at the bottom of the ladder, like when you're a baby nurse or a baby consultant, you kind of have to do a lot of things. and you have to do them all well. But then you specialize as you move up. And so it's a job of the people in the middle to kind of advocate and provide kind of fire cover to people below. And I think it's on all of us to be responsible for, you know, I don't want people that I work with working stupid hours. I actually want them to do well, because that's when they'll use their better parts of their mind, right?
Absolutely. I agree with you as well. But I think the pandemic really didn't help the situation, because majority, especially in Asian context, I think a lot of us can agree that we don't look at the world in a flat manner, right? I think from your experience, your clients probably would want to use the hierarchical system as much as possible, and it just becomes, it's a legacy system that is just so difficult to change. Anyway, related to this, I'm going to throw it over to Dari. Can you share with us your perspective and why you think these boundaries are just so darn difficult to set? I think from your own personal experience as well, and you can think from a systematic level, you know, as a communicator yourself, why do you think
Yeah.
it's so difficult to set? And everyone in chat, feel free to join in and put in your personal comments in chat as well.
Okay. I think personally for me, it's been quite a journey, because naturally, like what Emmy kind of spoke about earlier, I completely agree. Like hustle culture is really something, you know, that Singaporeans really pride ourselves in, unfortunately. Um, and it's something that we should try to change, you know, if I'm being very honest. Working long hours does not really equate to creating quality work. So, you know, it's kind of mirroring what Emmy exactly said, right? I would rather kind of provide the company that I work for quality over quantity. So it doesn't matter how many hours I burn, how many, you know, posts go out in a day in a social media context. You know, it's more of whether I'm creating meaningful content. You know, is it reaching the right audience? What am I seeking to do here? What's the objective, right? If I'm looking to educate someone, you know, would I want to just bombard them with like a whole slate of content that really just overwhelms them? Or do I want to be mindful and thoughtful about, you know, what exactly I'm hoping to break down or speak about? So I think that was my first step in realizing that I needed to kind of learn how to set my own boundaries, right? Just so that I wouldn't burn out personally, and also to kind of make, or rather be the change, at least in my opinion. Because I guess I'm lucky in the sense that at Rice, you know, we are allowed to kind of operate on our own devices, in the sense that time management is not policed here. But at the same time, it also means that it comes with cons, right? So everyone works on their own, you know, like time zones, time management frames and stuff like that. So I'm someone who likes to stick to a specific set of hours that I feel are most productive to me. Some people prefer the morning, some people prefer the afternoon, some people prefer the nights. So if I'm working with someone who's, you know, most active at night, that's something that, you know, is going to be a problem for me, right? So I think learning how to set boundaries was something that was really useful to me. And it was really important to kind of inculcate that in not just myself, but to the people around me, my colleagues. On a systemic level, I got to start actually making change when I started, you know, becoming a manager. So that's when I realized that, you know, I wanted to be a manager who's empathetic, who understands, you know, what people on the junior levels feel, because I've been there before. So like what Emmy said, right? You know, for nurses, everyone who's basically, you know, starting from scratch, you're not really, you know, given the choice to pick the hours that you want to work. You're just told, do this for me, right? And no matter how long it takes, you just got to deliver. And so for me, what was really important was to listen, and then to help kind of support my team members. How am I going to help them draw the boundaries? Am I able to kind of coach them into doing that? How am I able to ensure that they're able to do this without my presence as well? Yeah, so I think on the systemic level, that's something that I've been trying to do. Yeah.
Dari, just to add one context question to what you just said. So when you say that we are left to our own devices, right? Then
Yeah.
how do you choose or lay out your priorities, because everything adds value at the end of the day when you're tasked with something. So how do you personally think about your priorities?
I think for me, on a social media level, I guess it comes down to the relevance of the content that I'm creating. So because of how fast news moves on social media, I think it's important for me to prioritize content that is really relevant on that day itself, or for example to the very last minute, right? And then after which other tasks kind of come in, where there's like check-in sessions, be it calls, answering briefs, stuff like that. Yeah, so that's roughly how I kind of prioritize my work.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I mean, do you want to chime in about prioritization and I guess prioritization is part of setting boundaries. So what do you have a framework? Do you have a trick to help with that?
Yeah. I always have a framework. But no, really, so the other complex part of this, right? So I have 2 kids and a husband. So technically I have 3 kids. And that's not to be derogatory, but he has taken a lot of training to get to where he is now. But my 2 littlest children are 5 and 2, right? And that's a hard age. And so there are things that I cannot compromise with them. Like I can't compromise on dinner time because it's the only time I get to see them. I can't compromise on bedtime. And so those things are kind of like they're my non-negotiables. However, I believe that, so in the work that I do, and very similar to the work that I did when I was a nurse, at the end of the day, it wasn't about me, right? So when I was helping a patient, it was about them. And I was there on their clock, not on mine, on theirs. And so I was there to help them. And it's the same when I think about my work. So when I'm on the client's clock and I'm billing their time, or they're paying me for their time, I want to make sure that I'm aligned to what they want. And it's actually really tricky to get that out of them. And it's really tricky to have a conversation with them that's like, I have kids and I have boundaries around what times I can and can't be available. And so, yes, I'll be flexible about what you need. And I know that you're a global company or whatever. And I know that you might have a different culture. And I mean, this is talking in consulting, right? I think if you're internal in a company, it could be easier or harder, I'm not sure. But for me, it's very much about like, if I'm aligned to what, and I want to be really careful here because I don't want to say I'm aligning myself to external things all the time, but I check, am I doing this because I'm trying to prove something to other people because I feel like I'm insecure and I'm trying to say, hey, I'm really good, I'm a really good worker and I'm going to do all these hours, or am I just trying to deliver value? And that's kind of the difference for me.
That's a very good one, because I am personally also struggling with the idea of, am I doing this just to appease internal politics, or am I really doing this because there is a cause to bring to the bigger picture, right? At the end of the day. So all these reality checks are actually quite helpful. All right, so we set the context in general about setting boundaries in general. So I'm wondering also about I don't know if this is a little bit too controversial or not, but like physical boundaries as well with colleagues, I think is really important as well, and it's often always overlooked, right? Because such a tough topic to address head on. So I'm just gonna throw it over to Dari and Emmy. Like, if you want to share, not personal experiences, but just a general view or misconception of common physical boundaries that were pushed, that shouldn't have been pushed. Or if physical is too difficult, we can go with emotional. So any manager that you've seen or heard personally where they push an employee way too much, and then there are consequences to it as well. So maybe for the audience in the crowd, just like, what are some of these telltale signs that maybe perhaps we have pushed someone a little bit too much?
So it takes me a little while to come off mute, but and I didn't want to jump in front of you, Dari, so please add as well. But I think in terms of the physical, so things that, and I think all the women on the call will know this, right? And it sucks, but we tend to put these boundaries in place. I think especially as more mature women. I'm not to say that younger women don't do this, but I do think that it was something that only formed later in my life, that I was like, oh, I will wear a shirt with buttons all the way to the neck, or I won't wear a skirt, or because I'm going out to a dinner where there's only men, right? And this is a problem we need to talk about, but it's the same as the car keys in the car park, or like not walking down a street that doesn't have a light. And I think we're very lucky in Singapore to have a fair bit of safety. But in other parts of the world, it's just not the reality for a lot of women. So in terms of physical stuff, I think, I'm not going to give the advice that you need to dress down and you need to, not be seen as attractive or be your best self. But I do think you need to be aware of, like even with COVID, there's a lot of it going around, and the social distancing thing is something that we all need to be conscious of. And, like sometimes it's just about removing yourself a little bit, stepping back. Sometimes it's just about taking yourself away. If you've spent a lot of time with a particular group of people, like that's my limit. I actually can't do anymore.
Well, I mean, what do you say then to people who think that, COVID's here to stay, so why should I think any different? Like, it's just back to life as per normal and everything. What do you say to people who think that way?
Look, I think it's a valid point, right? Because it kind of is, and from a health perspective, a good virus doesn't want to kill its host, right? So that's it just doesn't, and so that's epidemiology and whatever else. But also, I think we've still got a responsibility for the people who are vulnerable in our society. And so, yes, I sort of think it'll run its course and that will all happen. But I also think that there are people who will not just get it and get mild symptoms. And so we still need to be conscious and careful around the people who are spending our time with. I think especially in the context of places like Singapore, where there is a larger population of elderly, the same in Australia, where that vulnerable, they don't have a choice, right? It's not their choice, but it is ours. So that's where I think you can draw that boundary.
Okay. Good points. Thank you very much, Dari.
Okay, I think if you're talking about physical boundaries, I have this weird thing where I'm constantly like sanitizing in public spaces, right? So I guess that's like social responsibility. But then there's also, having to face that weird feeling of shame when people like turn around and look at you weirdly. And I'm like, but why? Like, why is this happening, right?
The pandemic's still ongoing, people.
We've lived in this for like 2 years, guys. Like, why is this something that's, a new concept to you? And, even in the office space, for example, when I go in, my immediate, thought is, okay, I need to wash my hands. And then I need to sanitize my table. So like there's a whole systematic approach to it before I start work. And, I think that's a physical boundary that I've drawn for myself, right? And of course, to some, colleagues or friends of mine, they would find it a bit strange
like
that
overboard, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I've been told that. But I think for me, I've reached a stage where I'm able to kind of shut that out because, I should not have to feel shameful of, the things that I do, right? Because I'm like the intention behind this boundary is to protect not just myself, but the people around me. So be it my colleagues, my loved ones, my friends. So I think it's basically thinking about the intention behind drawing a physical boundary. Even for example, when you're talking with colleagues and someone kind of goes in for a hug, if you're not comfortable, right, it's completely fine to draw that boundary and say like, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with that kind of physical contact, right? Because you would want to hug a friend, a family member, a loved one. But that doesn't necessarily extend to a colleague unless it's someone that, you have really built a connection with. So I think like these are some things that I've learned over my time for physical boundaries. If you're talking about emotional boundaries, yeah, gosh, I have, quite a bit of experience and
Yeah,
trauma
like
there.
someone taking a joke a little bit too far, for example, a colleague
Yeah,
who just
yeah.
goes a bit too far and they think that the right way to respond is to continue to joke about it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to work in this agency where the culture was, I guess, a bit strange for me personally because there was a lot of couples within the agency. So they were dating within the agency. And for me, I knew I had to clearly draw the boundary that, I did not want I did not want that kind of relationship in the office. But I think where I started feeling, the need to draw a stronger emotional boundary was when people, or rather my colleagues, my ex-colleagues were trying to constantly set me up with, another colleague. And it became like a running joke where they were like, okay, so for example, I'm Indian, I'm brown. So the natural match for me would be another brown guy. And I'm like, yeah, that's just something that, is uncalled for. And like, if it's once, I can let it pass, yeah, whatever. But if it's constantly being, done and it really starts, kind of like nagging at you, um, it really takes a toll sometimes, right? Because it seems like it's just a small thing. Um, but yeah, so that's when I was like, okay, this is not right. I don't think it's fair to me or to the other colleague, in the involved in the joke. So which is when I went to my manager. But here's the strange part: my manager was not supportive. He did not really, give me the safe space that I was looking for to kind of express the feelings that I had. So that was when, I kind of had a turning point and I kind of learned that this is not a manager that I want to be, right? Being in a junior position, you're not able to make that change. But I told myself that when I get to, a position in the company where I'm in the middle, where I'm able to at least kind of create change, spark change, or have people listen to me, because if you're being honest, not many women are in leadership positions, right? We're not seen as people who, I guess, are, talented enough to be in these roles. So yeah, beyond that, whenever women are in leadership positions, when they're making change, it really inspires me to become, a better manager, and to be a better professional, right? Across the board. And yeah, I mean, yeah.
Right. So Dari, thanks for sharing that. I think it covers a really important point as well about sexism in the workplace as well. And I think I mean in the Asian context, at least I can speak for, is so existent still in this day and age, which is quite surprising. And I know for a fact that Singapore as well, it ranks very poorly when it comes to gender wage scales, the gap. So I mean, there's a lot to address that. So I want to go into the next question. So there are quite a number of questions already rolling in. So everyone, I will get to it, but let me ask this one quick question to the panelists before I go there. How do you address these people who have violated your boundaries then? Like Dari, you did say about how you tried to talk to someone and essentially there was no real solution to it. And can I ask how big was the agency? Because sometimes I feel like the size of the company does matter as well. But I mean, might have something to add there.
I think there were about 50 of us in the agency. So I would say it's not too small. Yeah, so to kind of finish up the whole conversation about that, when I realized my manager was not listening, I think for me the next best step was to sit down the people involved and to communicate, right? Because
That
sometimes
causes so much anxiety.
it did. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, because I wasn't sure what to expect. They might be really defensive, right? And not ready to kind of listen to what I had to say, which unfortunately was the case. So yeah, the whole conversation was really nerve-wracking because I was out here kind of just speaking up about my feelings and why this was something that I wasn't comfortable with. And I was trying to draw that boundary, but at the same time I think I had not completely learned the balance between being assertive and being aggressive at the same time, because I think these are two important qualities to have when you're drawing boundaries. Being aggressive is not a bad thing, but yeah, it's about drawing that the balance between being aggressive and assertive, and I had not reached that stage at that point. So I was thinking, I don't know, I was being really anxious at that point, so nothing was really working for me. And unfortunately, the boundary that I had drawn was quite weak after that conversation. So ultimately, my experience there was really terrible, and which is why it led to me,
Just
leaving.
leaving. Yeah.
Yeah.
Big question then. Does aggression help when addressing someone who has violated your boundaries? I mean, do you have an opinion on that?
Yes, I do have an opinion on this. And, I think, so on the point of aggression versus assertiveness, I think that, often behavior, particularly when it's gendered, so when it's women, when women are assertive, particularly in some countries, I'm not going to call them out, but it's not just unique to, say, Singapore, but it is an Asia Pacific problem. Women who are assertive are seen as aggressive. They're not seen as assertive, right? So it's oh, you were just a little bit too much, and well, it just wasn't taken the right way. So I do feel like we've got to also, as women, check ourselves and go like, am I being aggressive, or am I actually just being assertive and standing up for what is right? I also think that on that point of like, how do you deal with someone who has violated your boundaries? My first port of call on all of these situations is to go back to myself, right? And so it's get myself to a place of safety, security, talk to someone that I trust, who I know, whether that's a therapist, a coach, a good friend. I find with friends or partners, that sort of thing, there's an agenda, right? So you've got to be really careful when you're talking to those people. If you're talking to your mum, your dad, your sister, brother, whatever, they have an agenda because they know you and they want to give you the advice that will help you. But if you're talking to someone objective, like a coach or a therapist or a good objective friend, they can often help you to find the security that you need to get back into a place of, regulation, so that you can actually look at the context of the situation and go, what did I bring to this, if I did? But then also, what happened? What was the actual context? What actually happened? Because, sometimes people violate our boundaries without us realizing. And I'll go back to the emotional boundaries thing. It touches on this concept of psychological safety, right? Like, sometimes I'm in a really psychologically safe place with people. And, in the Australian context, if I talk about that for a second, we make a lot of jokes about ourselves. We're very self-deprecating people, right? We'll make jokes about ourselves, make jokes about each other. If we're in an agreed, psychologically safe environment, that's okay, right? And there's that there's a limit, but it's like, it's a joke and it's all right because I trust these people. But when it's a new context or it's repeated behavior where it's not accepted, it's not psychologically safe, that's when I go, that's verging on bullying and that's verging on inappropriate behavior. So I always do the kind of the check of like, do I feel psychologically safe that if I were to put my hand up and say, you know what, that joke was too far, I'm not okay with that. Don't make that joke again. Like, ha ha ha, but don't. That person would respect it, then I'm psychologically safe. If they don't, if they laugh it off and they say, well, you're too aggressive or whatever, then that's a problem. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So reading it back in a little bit, let's talk about expectations on us as employees. How quickly should we actually react to say no to things? Because I think setting boundaries is really a lot about saying no. So how do you go about that? How quickly should we react to say no? And maybe like, what do you use as a measure, I guess?
I think back to the point around being secure and regulated in yourself puts you in a place of soft or hard power, right? To talk about Yamini Naidu's work. She wrote a book about power play, and I think that sometimes there are moments where you need to call someone immediately and go, sorry, but that's not okay. And then there are other times where you just kind of pause and go, I need to reflect on this, and I need to take myself back to a place of safety. And then I need to bring this up with them later and go, you know what, that situation didn't make me feel comfortable. And I felt like it was, it made me feel really uncomfortable, or whatever it was. Yeah.
Dari, what do you use to measure in terms of saying no?
I think for me, it's this technique that my therapist taught me. So she calls it body scanning. So it's basically how your body reacts, right? When something happens or when someone says something to you. So be it positive or negative, I think it's something that has really helped me to be able to understand why I am reacting the way that I am, right? So for example, if it's something that's negative, if I feel like, my boundaries are being crossed, naturally, I feel a lot of tension and tightness in my body. And so that kind of prompts me to really think about why I'm feeling that way, right? Where is this coming from? Is there a particular trigger involved? That has caused me to feel this way. And after which I'm able to kind of take a step back and rationalize whether this is something worth immediately reacting to or not. Because, before I started therapy, obviously I was all over the place. I wasn't regulated. So everything would just be like, me reacting on the spot, right? And while some of it have been hits, some have been misses.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important, right? To just take a pause, a step back, like what Emmy said as well, and to just think about why it made you feel the way that you do before you make that call, whether you want to say no or yes. Yeah.
Thanks so much for that. I'm going to throw our talk into the questions right now, if that's okay with you. I'm going to group some of them together. And as I mentioned earlier on this talk, a big thing about boundaries, or one of the biggest difficulties that I recognize, is about the junior talking to a senior level person and managing their expectation. I think that's the biggest difficulty, if I may say so. So a few of them actually are about this. For example, how to effectively communicate with your boss that you need more time to finish a task without sounding that I'm weak. That's one. How would a junior level be able to draw a boundary even without the support of their superiors? And how do you frame a boundary expectations talk before approaching your manager so that they will understand what you are asking for? And lastly, how would you advise people in lower positions to set their boundaries with people of higher positions at work? So by and large, I'm going to group all of them together into one. How do you communicate effectively to your boss about setting the boundaries without sounding like you're vulnerable or weak? And also at the same time, ensuring that they follow through with it.
I think for me, what I would say is, yes, of course, it's going to be a really tough conversation to have, because not every manager is going to be open to listening and understanding, how you feel emotionally or physically, regarding the work that you do. But that said, I still feel like, you guys should still give it a shot, right? I think for me, taking that leap and being able to speak to my manager about, the way I feel, be it my mental health, for example. So I think it really depends on how open and vulnerable you are to, that conversation in itself. I don't think it's weak to be vulnerable in that conversation, to be honest, because I feel like honesty is what really will help you communicate the need and the intent behind these boundaries that you want to draw. But that said, as a manager myself, what I try to do is to constantly check in on my teammates to kind of understand if they're doing okay, if they're managing well. So if you feel like your manager might not be, as open or as empathetic as you might want them to be, perhaps, it might help for you to make that first step, right? To kind of reach out. Just be honest. Just let them know, what your concerns are, what your problems are, and then I'm sure they'll be open to kind of negotiating any help or any, ways in which you can share the workload, perhaps. Yeah.
I'll add to that. So I think that there's a general shift that's happened in the ways of working, especially with COVID, but also just a generational shift, right? I think when I first started working, it was not okay to say I can't do that or I won't get that done. I would get a proposal landed on me at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday. This needs to be ready for partner review on at 8 a.m. on Monday, right? And so I was like, well, it's quite clear that that's I'm working somewhere between 5 p.m. on Friday and 8 a.m. on Monday. And you do the math. But that was the old way, and it was just that you just made it work, right? You did whatever you did, and you just made it work. So at 8 o'clock on that Monday morning, you just showed up, and that wasn't healthy, right? I think that the cultural shift and the generational shift is much more a clarify early, raise things early, right? And that's my policy now. Is if I don't understand what I'm being asked to do, I ask straight away, hey, what format would you like that in? Can you, I didn't quite understand that. Can you help me understand what that was that you're asking me to do? Like, I get as much information as I can up front, and I ask a lot of questions, which annoys most of my managers. But that's a separate topic. But for me, that's because I can't be set up for success unless I get that. And then also, if I know that I'm not going to get it done at the time that they are asking for, I make sure I raise that early. So I say, there's a risk that I'm probably not going to get that done because of these X things. What can we do to make that happen?
That's helpful. So because I was going to ask a follow-up question to that. So how do you make sure it doesn't happen again or frequently? Because, sometimes you do this one time and then, people in the organization is like, oh, he's done it before, she's done it before, he or she can do it again. How do you make sure it doesn't happen? Or if you have a sign, I guess it's like to garner the confidence to just say, hey, you're taking advantage of me.
So it's a concept of, I think it comes back to trust and credibility, right? So if you think about trust, and I talk about this a lot, but the trust equation is something I'm really a big fan of, right? So it's credibility plus reliability plus intimacy over self-orientation. You can look it up, trust equation. It's and so I think about things like, if I trust someone, they're credible, they're reliable, they get to know me, and they're not there because it's a gain for them, they're there because it's a gain for me, right?
Yeah.
And if we think about it in our most primal relationships, right? So in my marriage, if my husband and I were to go toe to toe on things, right? So like, I make the bed one morning, which I never do. I do actually. If I make the bed in the morning and then he makes me a coffee, like, that doesn't equal itself out, right? What equals is if I make the bed, I pick up all the towels, I put the washing on, I make the breakfast, it takes about 5 things. And then if I were to say to my husband, I forgot to buy more milk, sorry, then it's like, for him, it's like, well, that's okay, because there's enough give, like there's credits in the bank. And I feel like that's the same with work, right? So you've got to prove to people, you've got to gain that trust first before you're able to say, hey, I can't meet that deadline, or I can't do that thing. That's not to say that you have to burn yourself out to get there, but it just means you've got to be credible and reliable.
Okay. Thank you very much, Emmy. You did answer, by the way, in the one that before I asked, the one there before I asked that question. Basically, one of it was about do you see a huge difference in perspectives around boundaries across the different generations? So Emmy Free said a little bit about this, so I'm going to throw it over to Dari about what you think about the differences you think in the different generations right now. And obviously, I think I'll address the elephant in the room and say I understand that the younger they get, the more they care about this.
Yeah,
but what do you think?
I mean, I totally agree with you. I mean, the younger generation obviously is a lot more, I mean, we're generally more open in terms of talking about mental health, right? About putting ourselves first, about being more open, vulnerable. But I guess in the Asian context, we've all been brought up, to be really conservative, to be really, to have our emotions kind of reeled in constantly, like, any expression of emotion is usually equated with being weak or being seen as, basically weak. And so I generally feel that in my experience, at least, managers who have been, more in like the baby boomer slash, like the late millennial kind of stage, they are quite slow on the uptake when it comes to asserting boundaries or understanding boundaries, right? And the importance of having them. But that said, I would also give them the credit that, some of them are really trying their best to kind of sit down to listen more, to understand what the youth in their company or rather what the youth in their teams are trying to communicate with them, which I think is really something that's commendable. And then, it comes down to the millennials. So I'm a millennial. And I think I'm really lucky to be, kind of like in the middle space between the Gen Zs and the baby boomers, right? So I've seen both sides of things. And I am very lucky that we are currently in a space that's so open and, ready to welcome, content, ready to welcome conversations like this, for example.
Just different perspectives that our
Exactly.
boomers were never exposed to.
Yeah, to just kind of widen our horizons, if you will, right?
Right.
And to just give it a thought about,
Right.
boundaries. And so if you're talking about generations, obviously the older generations are quite reserved in general. They don't really want to talk about it. But that said, I feel, we should still try and, break that wall or barrier that they have up. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for that, Dari. I know we're coming towards the end, and there were quite a few more questions, but I do want to ask a personal one, if you don't mind. And for those who still want to get an answer to your question, please write into us directly, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But during our pre-talk just amongst the Calm Collective team and our two panelists, one very interesting topic came up, and it's very relevant to all of us. Now, it's about boundaries with our managers and our colleagues on social media. What are your thoughts on that? And should we let them in or should we not let them in? This will be my last question, by the way.
Yeah. Look, I'm quite passionate about this topic because I've been burnt too many times. I think anyone who has worked with me, who likes working with me, would know that I'm somebody who I don't take myself very seriously. I take my work very seriously. And so who I am at work and who I am personally are they're not different people, but I operate in some nuanced ways, right? And I have a personality at work that I'm actually quite an introverted person. And I really don't like being around a lot of people, but my job means I need to be around a lot of people, right? Actually, at home, I like to just be by myself. And if I could sleep all day in my bed, if I could just stay there, I would. Yeah.
The pandemic was
Yeah.
very helpful. Yeah, I really appreciate
exactly.
the lockdown. But I did have a kid born right before the pandemic started as well. It's like, if my baby wasn't born, life would have been very quiet. But yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Not saying that I
no,
regret.
I feel you. I feel you. I gave birth the night before we all went into lockdown and the world changed. So we're actually coming up to that birthday.
We'll have a separate anonymous group for this. Dari, over to you. Social media and colleagues and bosses. What do you think?
I think for me it's quite strange because the nature of my job is that I'm constantly on social media, right? So as a content creator, many people kind of assume that I have this, huge following on my personal social media, which is not true at all. I'm very much similar to Emmy in the sense that, I'm an introvert and that I don't really like sharing my personal life with others. So that doesn't mean I hate the people that I work with. That's a boundary that I'm drawing because I was just sharing with Egan and Emmy earlier that, on, for example, my Facebook, right? Not that many of us are using Facebook for, what it was meant to be initially. Things are changing, the metaverse, guys. But what I was sharing with them was that on Facebook, all I do is just, kind of share memes, dark humor memes. So basically talking a lot about anxiety and depression. And it's not a cry for help. I promise you guys, it's not a cry for help. It's just, kind of like a coping mechanism, how I
Yeah.
like to kind of speak about it, right? And people in my personal circle, they know that. So which is why, I try avoiding, my colleagues kind of joining that circle, only because that might be like, a red flag or alarm bells ringing for them. And I don't want them to kind of ask me in the office space, like, are you okay?
Yeah.
Or like to check in on me. So yeah, I think for me, it's very important to kind of draw that boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah, between work and
It's like why create well, if they are friends with you on your Instagram and your Facebook, you give them reason to kind of insinuate things about you as well, and then
yeah,
they start to assume, which is so bizarre as well.
exactly.
So what's the
Yeah.
advice? What's the flat out advice? Don't do it unless you're
I
comfortable with it.
I
Like,
would, yeah, I would say just follow your gut feeling. Like you would know which colleagues in particular you are kind of more comfortable with, or who you feel are less judgmental. Yeah, because I think I completely agree with your point earlier about like how there's a lot of conjecture around like your personal life. People are constantly just waiting around to see if there's any like, interesting nuggets of information about your personal life. Although I'm not sure how that's relevant to the work, that we do,
yeah,
right? Yeah. So I think trust your gut. That's my advice to you. You would know deep down if you wanna invite this person into your personal space, so to speak.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Both very, very insightful conversations. Dari and Emmy, I'm going to throw it over to you in 30 seconds or less. Any last words you'd like to say to our guests on setting boundaries at work?
Yeah, look, it's hard, and I think we just need to recognize that. And I think, trust your gut. I think there's been a bit of that theme throughout this conversation. So trust how you're feeling in your body, right? I think that's a really good cue. But I also think, do what's right for you. And yeah, it's I think you can push your boundaries a little bit sometimes, as long as they're in line with your values and the values of whatever work you're trying to do for a short period of time. But if it's continuous, then you need to ask the question. Yeah.
So sometimes we don't want to confuse pushing the boundaries versus pushing our limits. I guess it's
Correct.
like, right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Dari, 30 seconds or
Okay.
less.
I think for me, yeah, I know like drawing boundaries are hard, but don't be afraid. I think, yeah, I just want to say don't be afraid to kind of assert those boundaries and to kind of just communicate, right? With be it your managers or your co-workers who are working with you. Just let them know if you're not comfortable with something, be it with workload or, just daily interactions. Yeah, just speak up, be brave, and communicate. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Dari. Well, round of applause for Emmy and Dari for joining us tonight. Thank you again for all of your insights and all of your experiences as well that you were so willing to share in front of so many people. So for everyone else, don't forget to follow us on social media for more content and conversations around mental health as part of our mission to destigmatize the issue in Asia. You can find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok. The handle is at Calm Collective Asia. You can also check out our upcoming talks on our website, www.calmcollective.asia. And Calm Collective Asia has been bringing talks, calm circles, and training programs to organizations and workplace. So if you want more talks like this one, and you it's part of your job to do this in your workplace, and you would like to yeah, have one of these interactive talks in your organization, just let us know. You can reach out to hello, HELLO, at calmcollective.asia for more information about our workplace wellbeing programs. And with that, my name is Egan, with our wonderful guests, Dari and Emmy. Thank you all and have a good night. I know Emmy needs to go home.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, she needs to go to bed. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
so much.
night.
Goodbye. Bye, everyone.